Good morning, everyone. For our in-person audience here in Austin, if I can have everyone take a seat as we get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Ewald. I serve the Texas Tribune as Senior Director of Events and Live Journalism. Welcome to those joining us in person here at the Tribune's studio downtown Austin, and those joining us around the state for our live presentation of TribCast previewing the 2026 Texas primary with Republican strategist Jason Villalba and Democratic strategist Luke Warford. In conversation with TribCast co-hosts Matthew Watkins and Eleanor Klibanoff, they'll discuss where the state's most consequential races stand and what their outcomes could mean for Texas. Our program will run approximately an hour, and we'll have time for a brief Q&A. So to get to as many questions as possible, you can submit questions through our Q&A portal at texastribune.org/ask. And for those here in studio, you can use the QR code on signage in the back of the room. And if you want to go old school and have questions on a note card, we can bring those to you as well. We are grateful for the support of our sponsors. Our presenting sponsor is Builders. You can join fellow builders at the Texas State Capitol on Texas Independence Day to celebrate with armadillo races, free food, music, and swag, and send a clear message that Texans are ready to turn out for the March primary. So that's from 10:30 to 1:30 on Monday, March 2nd on the south steps of the Texas State Capitol, and I believe we have some invitations there on the back table. And our major sponsors for today's program are Texas Matters and Raise Your Hand Texas. Please note that while sponsorship provides critical support for the Tribune, sponsors play no role in programming or the line of questioning for Tribune events. Also want to thank all of those around the state who make the journalism of the Tribune, including events like this, possible by becoming Texas Tribune members. I'd just love a show of hands for Texas Tribune members here in attendance this morning in 919, quite a few. Thank you so much. And if you'd like to support the work of the Tribune, you can visit texastribune.org/support. Also want to mention that today's conversation is but one aspect of the way the Tribune is covering the primary this year and, of course, this election year. Our 2026 primary voting guide has all sorts of resources for you that you can find at texastribune.org/vote. In the morning after Election Day next week, join Eleanor and a panel of experts for analysis of results from the Senate race, the battles for the Texas Ledge, and what races are going to runoffs. We'll be back here at 11 a.m. That's 11 a.m., giving our reporters and others just a little bit of time from what will likely be a late night. So 11 a.m. on Wednesday, March 4th with Renzo Downey, lead writer for The Blast for the Tribune, Brad Johnson, co-founder and reporter for the Texas Bullpen, and a good friend of the Tribune and TribCast, James Barragan, anchor of Capital Tonight on Spectrum News. You can learn more and RSVP at texastribune.org/events. And finally, as some of you know, we announced that Texas Tribune Festival returns to downtown Austin September 24th through 26th. TribFest is more than just another political event. It's a place to listen, learn, and grow, ask questions, challenge ideas, and make connections. Tickets go on sale soon. You can go to tribfest.org and sign up to receive our TribFest newsletter. Matthew and Eleanor will be introducing today's TribCast guests. So with that, I thank our in-person and online audience joining us from around the state and turn the program over to Matthew and Eleanor.
All right. Hello and welcome to the Texas Tribune TribCast for Tuesday, February 24th. We are a week out from Election Day, and I am Matthew Watkins, editor-in-chief of the Texas Tribune, joined as usual by law and courts reporter Eleanor Klibanoff. Hello, Eleanor.
Law and politics. Every time. Longtime fans of the TribCast will know that Matthew has never once gotten my title correct, despite being my boss. Law and politics reporter, thank you for having me.
Yes, great to see you again, law and courts reporter Eleanor Klibanoff. All right, and we are joined today by two distinguished guests, one from the left, one from the right, but not based on how are they arranged on stage. We have first, closest to me, former state representative Jason Villalba, Republican from Dallas, who is now CEO of the Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation. Jason, thank you for being here.
Well, it's wonderful to be here. I'm looking forward to the armadillo races soon. So it's great,
Seriously.
great to be back.
Sounds
Yeah.
great. That sounds great. And we also have Luke Warford, a political strategist based in Austin, founding partner of the Agave Democratic Infrastructure Fund and director of Texas Public Opinion Research. Welcome, Luke.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and I apologize for getting both of their titles correct.
Yeah, I'm also not a law and politics reporter.
Yeah.
So Eleanor can take that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, so I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I want to start with the Democratic race first. It's not often we do that here in Texas, but I think it has earned it this time. It has been. I was actually texting with Tribune co-founder Ross Ramsey last night, trying to ask him. I asked him to fill in the blank. This is the most interesting Democratic primary in Texas since when? Anyone want to guess what he said?
Ever.
At least since Ann Richards back in the 80s.
So that's interesting because I went with 1990, which was when Ann Richards was up against two other statewide candidates. He suggested I say 2002, which was, you may remember, the Dream Team. Ron Kirk, I believe, ended up being the candidate for Senate that year, going up against a handful of other high-profile candidates, including Victor Morales, who, do you know who that is? So Victor Morales was...
He was also law and
this a
politics
test?
reporter.
He was law and
Yeah.
yeah. He was a high school teacher, I think, based in Houston, and his students essentially like dared him to run for Senate. This is back in the 90s, and he shocked everyone traveling around the state in his pickup truck campaigning, shocked everyone by beating some, former statewide elected officials in the primary with 51% of the vote. Became sort of the 1990s version of like a sort of like national viral Democratic sensation, only to then lose in the general election. And then he ran again in 2002. And so, we'll see.
Politics used to be fun.
I know,
Man. Yeah.
exactly.
Used to be able to nominate your high school
Exactly.
teacher
Right.
to be a Senate candidate.
But the 2026 primary has been what I would argue sort of the viral Democratic primary. You have James Tallarico, a state representative with a sort of unparalleled amount of Instagram and social media followers. Jasmine Crockett, of course, has gone viral many times for her, confrontational tactics in the House, particularly with Marjorie Taylor Greene. And then we had the most viral moment of the campaign, the Monday night before Election Day starts, when Stephen Colbert goes on his show and blasts his employers, saying they banned him from airing an interview with Tallarico, encouraging his viewers to go on the YouTube page to watch. And that interview, over 85 million views so far on YouTube and socials and everything like that.
Proving yet again the Streisand effect, right?
Exactly.
right. Yeah.
Exactly. Luke, I want to start with you. Just sort of give me your lay of the land of this race right now and where you think we stand a week out.
Thank you so much. And it's great to be here. Where to start? I think the most important thing is that we're a week out, right? And I think folks who have been following this race over the last few weeks in particular, the temperatures turned up a little bit. I think we'll obviously talk about that. And I'm personally very much looking forward to getting through the primary and having a nominee and looking forward to November. I think when you think about Congresswoman Crockett and Representative Tallarico, the Colbert moment really brings to focus, I think, one of the most important things for any candidate in politics in 2026, not just here in Texas, but across the country. And that's, how good are you at getting attention? And I would actually argue, to disagree with Ross's point about 2002, we're in a totally different information ecosystem than we were then. And I think the idea that a clip like this Colbert clip could get 85 million views, the idea that both Jasmine Crockett and James Tallarico are household names across the country for people who follow Democratic politics, we're in a different moment right now, and you've got two candidates who are just incredibly effective at getting attention.
And clearly what we're seeing from those two candidates being so robust as candidates that it's really driving turnout. If you look at the early numbers from turnout from week one, The Democrats now are at 102% of what they were in 2024, I believe it is, or 2022. So they are now exceeding in the first week the total turnout that they had in 2022, whereas the Republicans remain at about 43%. 50% where they were before. So I think you're seeing real interest in that race, and it's really driving people to the polls early.
Eleanor, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, this race and the virality of it, right? And one of the things that sort of came up was, one of the ways that you get attention these days is by stoking outrage, right? And it was this sort of interesting experiment because it seems like Tallarico, is trying to sort of get that attention without sort of lighting the fire under people. And, would that work? And it turns out the way it worked was he relied on Stephen Colbert
Someone else
to stoke
lit the fire.
outrage.
Exactly. Right.
Well,
yeah,
but it's
yeah.
it's been working though, right? Like I just like to zoom out, right? Like you've got a state rep from Texas that like has no business being known all across the country, and he's one of the most effective social media communicators in the entire party, right? He's raising more money and getting more views than people who are sitting United States senators right now. So I just think that's like really special and unique, and it's not just the Colbert moment. It's like his team's preparation for it and all the work that led into it.
And he's truly the anti-rage candidate, right? I mean, talks about the love of Jesus and religion and politics. He's known on the House floor for being a very articulate person who really thinks deeply about issues that impact all Texans. And that is something that's unique. I mean, for so long, we've been trapped in the rhetoric bubble, the rage machine. The Republicans have done an amazing job of truly harnessing and leveraging that rage for everything from news clicks to Fox News hits. And that's been a popular recipe. But this is the guy that comes and talks about the kinds of things that we might have talked about 15, 20 years ago. And he's resonating in a way, I think, that people have not seen in Texas in many, many years.
But I will also say, I think that's true. I think he's like trying to find this lane that is essentially like, I won't stoke the rage. Maybe some of my surrogates will stoke the rage. And I think that is a very, tricky thing to navigate. And on the flip side, I think there are a lot of Democrats who are like, Republicans have harnessed the rage machine. Let's harness the rage machine. Like Jasmine Crockett's a fighter. Let's not, why do Democrats have to be peace and love? And what did we say last week? Or God and good manners? Yeah, James Tallarico, God and good manners. Send a fighter to the Senate. So I think one of the things we will see from this is, what do Democrats want in terms of sort of a response to the second Trump administration?
But I do think, among the four of us who care deeply about the state legislature and pay a lot of attention to it, I think we sort of saw these two as sort of like equal figures in the imaginations of Texans. But of course, we are reminded, despite our best efforts, that there are many people in Texas who really only pay attention to national politics, and
some who don't pay attention to politics at all.
Exactly.
Matthew, dare we say?
And it seemed like, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Luke, because I know you're in the polls. But it seemed like if you looked at the polling kind of in the run up to the primary, that Crockett did have a bit of a sort of name ID advantage, and that people did know more about her. And then this happens, and suddenly, both in Texas and in nationally, James Tallarico is a top 5 Google search, which I check the Texas Google searches, to see what people are talking about. And it's never even really politicians. It's like, soccer games, right. And, things that
ERCOT.
Exactly. Well, yeah, occasionally like
Elon Musk.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And so in that regard too, it really got his name in front of a lot of people. I think the question is, is that a brief flash or is that a needle moving moment for him?
And to follow on for that question for Luke, because I'm interested in Luke's perspective on this, how do you juxtapose him versus a Beto, right? Who also seemed to tap into the zeitgeist of what was happening in the rural areas. How is Tallarico different, and can he eke out that additional 2% that would be necessary in order to win at the statewide level?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot there. I mean, I think I'll start with, the Colbert moment, Tallarico going on Rogan. Like, I do think there is a really important distinction here, right, between the people who are listening to this podcast and sort of voters across Texas, and then even the difference between your general election voter and a primary voter, who's like the primary voter is paying more attention. I do think the Colbert moment broke out of the echo chamber, right? And that's incredibly hard to do, right? It's not just getting attention, it's who you're getting attention from. And clearly, it broke out sort of into the stratosphere in the same way that I think the Joe Rogan interview did, right? Where, and obviously this is anecdotal, but it's a time when people I know who don't follow politics really are sending me the clip, and it's like, okay, this has made it into their algorithms. So I think like definitely that moment is sort of like set apart. I do think those moments, while important in a primary, are actually more important in a general, right? Because primary voters tend to be more tuned into what's happening and higher information. And so I think for either candidate, it's going to be about whether or not they're going to be able to generate things like that going forward. And then to Eleanor's question about like what do Democratic primary voters want, we've pulled this a lot, right? And they want someone who is a fighter, and they have different ideas about what that means to be a fighter, which I'm happy to go into. But then they also want somebody who's electable, and they have very different ideas about who is electable, right? Like Tallarico supporters think Tallarico is more electable, but Crockett supporters think she is more electable as well. She's got this huge profile. I mean, she's also pretty well known even outside of politics, right? To your point, Matthew, she started with this, like in a primary, name ID is huge, right? And she started with this huge name ID lead, and you've seen Tallarico, creep up and get closer to parity over the course of the race. But I think one of the biggest questions is like, is there enough time, and is what's going to, happen by next Tuesday?
Okay, Eleanor, I warned you about my hot take on this topic, and
This
it's
was
time
all.
for me
This
to-
entire event was just
to-
a
so I
setup
get-
so he can give his hot take on the CBS moment.
So, of course, what happened, I know everyone knows this, but, Stephen Colbert essentially comes on and says, I wanted to have James Tallarico on my show. CBS comes in and says that we can't do this because the FCC won't allow it. You need to give equal time to the candidates. Of course, the background here is that the Colbert show is over the public airwaves, right? And there is a reason that the public airwaves are regulated differently than other types of media, because you essentially have to get a license to obtain them, and there's you can only give out a limited number of licenses, or else the whole broadcast system falls apart. And we, as a country, have made a decision that you should not use those to explicitly advance individual candidates or anything like that. James Tallarico, in this race, he's a high-profile politician, but Colbert wants to have him on his show the Monday night before early voting, right? Tallarico had not had any kind of like major national moment. What other reason is there to have him on your show the night before people start voting, except to help his campaign, to give him an advantage, and to sort of, maybe if you're not explicitly endorsing him, at least get him in front of an audience that might not normally see him during the most important time to do that? I mean, I'm going to ask you this as the Republican, like, I understand that there's some criticism of this, does the FCC under Trump regulate, talk radio in the way it should, and all different kinds of things. But like, under the system that we have created, is this not a violation of equal time? Is this someone using the public airwaves to put their finger on the scale here?
Well, you could certainly argue that, but there is case law on this, right? I mean, there is a history and a precedent that in instances where you have a talk show like The View, or you have Colbert, or one of the other nightly talk shows, having someone on who is a personality and a candidate does not necessarily mean that you have to give equal time. It's not that rigid. There are some contours that you have to be aware of, but I mean, we've seen historically a number of candidates come on without equal time. time. I mean, during presidential candidates, during other candidates. So I think you could look at the case law and suggest that it's not a violation. Now, that being said, the timing is unique, right? I mean, here we are.
That's a good word for it.
In this moment. But as Luke points out, Tallarico's unique. He is very unique in what he stands for. He's different. He's a media personality, as per Google and Joe Rogan and everything. So just being a candidate, does that sell him short? Now, if I were Crockett, I would be very angry about this. Certainly she wants her time as well. I think Republicans probably don't do as well on Colbert as the Democrats do, and so they're probably not trying to get on there. But they've been all over the airways on Mark Davis up in North Texas and Michael Berry down in Houston, et cetera. And so sometimes you don't see that. So I don't think it's as big of an issue legally or from the FCC's perspective as one might think, but I can certainly see why it might ruffle some feathers.
I would just add, I agree with that, and would just add that it was clearly a gift to the Tallarico campaign, like that, you couldn't manufacture that. I also just wouldn't put it past Colbert's a genius, right? Like, I wouldn't put it past him having designed this, right? Set it up as this conflict, and he knew exactly what he was going to do, and he knew exactly how it was going to play out. And maybe it wasn't to help Tallarico, maybe it was just to help his show and himself, and that would not be that surprising to me either.
He's a fellow card-carrying member of the God and Good Manners Club, so I do feel it's not shocking that but it's an interesting. I mean, it is suddenly. It's everyone suddenly became an expert in the FCC equal time rule.
Well, I do think it is important though to just note, right, what happened. Obviously, it went viral in a way that you couldn't have predicted, but his campaign, he has spent years and years and years developing the social media profile, the grassroots fundraising list. That they raised $2.5 million in the 24 hours after this happened. That's because he had this massive fundraising list built. Not every candidate would have been able to take advantage of that in the same way that he did. So I just think it's also whatever the quote is, luck is when preparation meets opportunity or whatever. There's some. I think we just gotta pay attention to both sides of it here.
You briefly mentioned the concept of electability, which is a very sensitive topic in this race, right? And there are a lot of Crockett supporters who are quite offended by that, right? They argue that the electability standard for a white man is different than for a black woman, and argue that some of that is coded and unfair and all those other things. But I'm curious, there is the question of who has the best chance of winning in the general election. I assume that you would like to see Republicans hold on to that seat. Do you have a feeling of is there a better, candidate for Republicans to be facing there?
Well, there certainly is, right? I mean, right now in the Republican primary, you've got three candidates, one of which is an establishment candidate in Senator Cornyn, who obviously received all the support of the larger establishment, and for the old blue blood Republicans, they want to see him. He would obviously be the most electable from the Republican standpoint. Unfortunately, that's not where the grassroots and the primary voters in Texas stand. They're very much aligned with Ken Paxton, regardless of the headwinds that he faces, some of the, how shall we say, more delicate issues that he has been faced with. He still seems to be odds-on favorite to win, right? So, I think that gives the Democrats a real advantage from their perspective. So who do they want against him? Crockett, for all of her name identification, for her reputation as a fighter, for her ability to really just resonate with the grassroots of the Democrats, unfortunately made a very problematic, unforced error in the very beginning of her campaign publicly. And that was that she made a statement that did not go well with Hispanic voters in Texas, right? She talks about African American voters, and they're obviously strongly behind her based on the polls we've seen. But then she essentially denigrated Latinas in a way that really did not go over well with the Hispanic community, either right or left, particularly among Democrats. And so that's going to be an issue for her. You know, there's been a tremendous amount of talk recently about how Hispanics have moved over closer to the Republican side of things. And in 2024, 55% of Latinos in Texas voted for Trump. But we've seen a market erosion in that over the last year, right? Driven primarily by affordability and economic issues, but unquestionably, the aggressive tactics of ICE have begun to really dig into the support that Latinos were showing for Republicans. Now they're moving back to their original home of the Democratic Party, and they are not happy with Crockett. And I think on the other side, Tallarico has been appealing to them, right? Talking about affordability, talking about religion, right? Hispanics generally are a religious people, right? And so I think that's really made a difference. And so I think, long story short, if you're whoever wins in the Democratic side, you want to see Paxton because I think he's the weaker candidate against both of those. And I think Tallarico has a much stronger appeal to a general Texas elector, and in the general, than Crockett will.
It feels like the Republican side of this race has just been a little bit more stable, for a lack of a better term, and like there hasn't been much that has shaken up the dynamic of this primary from now to whenever we started hearing about Ken Paxton running.
Potentially the only thing Ken Paxton's ever been involved in, like, that's more stable than anything else going on. But yeah, it's been, I think, followed a little bit more of like the storyline that we knew when he first started even talking about running is sort of still the storyline now, even with Wesley Hunt entering the race, even with like some of these surprises. I think everyone is sort of playing their anticipated roles clear through to the end.
You know, I served with Ken Paxton in the legislature, and I was always surprised at his ability to really tap into that primary voter elector, right? I mean, and regardless of what scandals may have followed him into the legislature and during that time, and then coupled with the impeachment and then add on the infidelity, nothing seems to impact his ability to resonate with that community of voters. And so he maintains a real strength that I always found surprising. There's a reason I'm unelected, right, in a primary, because I did not resonate with that same type of voter. But he really does seem to have some strength among them. We tested him at the Policy Foundation several years back, and he continues to show really strong numbers against establishment Republicans, especially. And Cornyn, for all he's done for this great state of Texas and for his great experience and his wonderful, stellar resume, he always will have to face that label of being establishment. And in Republican Party politics today, an establishment Republican is truly no longer wanted, as a candidate in these kind of major races.
This is why I'm always, obviously we'll see, in a couple weeks and then in November, but skeptical about the idea that Ken Paxton is vulnerable to Democrats. I think, he's won statewide elections while facing, a lot more headwinds. I mean, with the exception of his divorce, he's shaken off most of his legal baggage. And so I think it'll be interesting to see, like you said, I think grassroots voters really, really like him and are a very motivated group of voters. And then I don't know that he's going to get that many crossover voters in the general election.
I think a general election voter is much different than the modern Republican primary voter. The modern Republican primary voter is a distilled component of what we used to call the Tea Party. And now it's truly Trumpism, right? I mean, there is no Republican Party. There's only the Trump Party. And if you are not beholden to the Trump Party, a populist nativist, then you're not going to appeal to a Republican Party primary voter. That is much different than the general electorate that we're seeing develop in Texas, primarily from carpetbaggers who've come in from California, and also the emergence of the strength of the Hispanic voter. Right, the Hispanic voter today, we used to always call them the sleeping giant. They're wide awake in Texas today, and they are the swing vote, and they can be won by either side. Right, and I think Paxton's going to struggle with the Hispanic vote, and I think Talarico does a good job. It's going to be quite a contest. I mean, Beto was within a whisker of taking out Ted Cruz in a cycle much like this. Times have changed. It's a different, like you say, ecosystem media-wise, and the candidates are different. And Paxton will have some of the same baggage that Ted Cruz had, just the likability factor. And Talarico, much like Beto, which is why I asked that question, I think appeals to this younger voter that is showing up at the polls now that we haven't really seen since Beto.
Well, and I just think that, like, we're all kind of taking for, kind of assuming Ken Paxton's going to win or he's the front runner. But that's, and he is the front runner, but that's like incredibly, if you look at Senate races across the country, like that you've got incumbent like John Cornyn, who's going to have $70 or $80 million spent on his behalf, and he might finish third in the Republican primary. Like, I think that's really significant, right? And I think it speaks to this fight that is happening within the Republican Party, and in particular the Republican Party of Texas, where like it's not super clear. Like, I think there is a battle happening for the identity of what it means to be a Republican, for the identity of what it means to be a Texas Republican, and we're going to see how that plays out. Like, these forces, as Paxton, of course, is going to do really well with the MAGA base, but I think the question is, how do you get to 50% plus one in November? And to Eleanor's point, like, who knows if this is going to be a year like 2018, right? But you've got Trump in the White House. It's, a midterm. It's always the year where Democrats, the opposite party, does the best. People are frustrated with the economy. You've got a pretty contentious Republican primary. I think those are if you were to ask me, like, what factors would you want to exist for Democrats to, have a shot, not like a, not like a 50% shot, but like a shot, it would be how things are shaping up this year.
Well, the civil war within the Republican Party has been fought, and MAGA has won overwhelmingly. There is no longer a battle between moderate Republicans, Tea Party Republicans, MAGA Republicans. I mean, MAGA has won this battle. So in a primary, that's who you have to appeal to, right? Now, in a general, that's much different, and I think we're going to see how that plays out. And I do believe that the general electorate has changed dramatically, even since 2022.
I had an interesting experience last night. I was up in Georgetown. This group, Project Unity, had pulled together a dinner that they call Together We Dine. And it's pulling people from across the political spectrum to kind of come together, sit around a table for like a facilitated conversation with the goal of like addressing some of the division that we face. And it's a group of sort of civic leaders, people maybe inclined to participate in that kind of conversation. And we got about halfway through the conversation, and this woman sitting next to me says basically, well, I was all about unity until like a couple years ago. And now I sort of think like, I don't think this is working anymore, and we got to go like do something wild here. And then other people around the table were like, you know what? I actually agree with that too. And I was like, if the like nice church ladies at this like unity event that I'm sitting at are saying this, like, we are in a very interesting world right now, and that sort of like run to the middle attitude in these primaries is just, I'm not sure how much interest there is in the electorate for that kind of message right now.
Right. I mean, and that's why John Cornyn is not running as like, oh, I'm a bridge builder, I've done work across the aisle. He's running as, I'm Trump's man, and that's why you should pick me, which is, telling.
In the AG's race, Mays Middleton, MAGA Middleton, right?
I'm always trying to talk about the AG's race.
How far to the right can you go? But I think it comes back to talking about winning a primary versus winning a general. And whoever becomes the Republican nominee, their job in the general is different than the Democrats, right? They've won for 30 years. And so I think on the Democratic side, it's like, how do you create the permission structure for independents, moderate Republicans, disaffected Republicans to come over and vote for a Democrat when they haven't before? And, you can, again, kind of see a world where Ken Paxton, who, we could talk for hours about everything he's done, where maybe they vote for the Democrat. Maybe people actually do that. And so I think, it's certainly not going to be boring this November.
Let's talk about turnout a little bit. You touched on it some. Through 6 days of early voting, Republicans, 528,000 Republicans voted. Through 6 days of early voting, 619,000 Democrats voted. Not often that you see more Democrats voting than Republicans in Texas. I know there are so many caveats to this, including just the fact that Democrats seem more inclined to vote early. But we sort of go through this every year now, where people like look at the early voting numbers and they're like, "Whoa, man! Like Democrats, like this really
tells
means
us
something."
everything.
And then it doesn't really tell us that much. Is it different this year?
What does it tell us?
There's a sage in Texas named Derek Ryan. Derek Ryan's data, I think, is some of the best that you can look at. And what he's taught me over the last several cycles is that early voting numbers are very hard to read. The tea leaves are sporadic, they're different. It's often driven by personality of the race. There's all kinds of different factors that go into it. And in the end, it always aligns, right, to where it always lands anyway. I do think, though, that if you look anecdotally at the turnout that we're seeing right now and couple it with what we saw in SD9 recently, I think those two factors combined suggest to you somewhat dispositively that there is much more enthusiasm right now among Democrats than there are Republicans, right? We saw a much higher turnout in SD9 among Democrats than we had before. That's a bellwether county. It looks a lot like the rest of Texas, and Democrats overwhelmingly won that race. And not only that, Republican crossover was happening too there. And then the Hispanics, of course, went dramatically back to where they were before. I think that, coupled with this turnout, coupled with the interesting races that we're seeing, suggests to me that the enthusiasm gap does indeed exist. It will have an impact in the general election, and certainly will have an impact in these primaries.
We should just say Senate District 9 in Tarrant County, which was recently won in a special election by Democrat Taylor Remmett. Yeah.
With a 31-point shift, right? Yeah. And no one thinks that there's going to be a 31-point shift in November, but it's certainly, we see data point after data point across the country, but here in Texas, that's like, okay, this is probably going to be a pretty good year for Democrats. It's probably going to be a wave. I think when we come back to the Democratic enthusiasm, like enthusiasm is obviously good. We should not read too much into the early voting data, obviously, with all of the caveats that I agree with. But I do think like some of what's happening, and this is true with early voting, this is true with how contentious the race has gotten, honestly, on the Democratic side. Like, I think there is a genuine hope and belief that whoever becomes the nominee might actually win in November, right? Like, I think all of the structural data we have, everything, all the historical data we have suggests this is probably going to be Democrats' best election, at least since 2018 in Texas. And so people are fighting and they're excited, and they're, everything that we're seeing happening, I think really is rooted in a belief that like, oh, they might have a shot in November.
You mentioned Derek Ryan. I am among the religious readers of his daily voting reports.
Acolytes.
And I am going to read off another stat that caught my eye that I am going to argue does mean more, less for the general election, but for the primary. And I'm going to ask you two much smarter poll readers than I am whether there's anything to that. And it's the percentage of voters based on primary history, right? He measures, how many people have only voted in Republican primaries in the past, how many have voted only in Democratic primaries in the past, how many have mixed, how many are first-time general, or only general election voters, and things like that. In past years, it's been about 75% in each party of the people voting are, consistent voters of that party in previous primaries. This year, 82% of Republican primary voters are consistent historic Republican primary voters. Only 65% of Democratic primary voters are consistent primary voters. And what that suggests to me is that there are a lot fewer people crossing over from the Democratic primary than in past elections. There has always been, not as many as you would think, but there have always been voters who, might not be hardcore Republicans, but who vote in the Republican primary because traditionally that is the primary that decides who's going to represent us statewide. But we have such an interesting Democratic primary this time, and there is such excitement and hope about the general election that it seems like from the numbers that that's not happening as much. And if I am John Cornyn, if I am maybe like a Joan Huffman, if I'm who's running as someone, she kind of portrays herself as a Republican who respects the law in the AG race. If I am Nate Sheets running against Sid Miller in the Ag Commissioner race, I am a little bit worried that we're not seeing as many independents or Democrats crossing over and trying to vote for maybe the Republican who's a little bit more palatable to them. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I do largely. And also, I'll look at another number that Derek put in there, and that is first-time voters, people first time to the poll. I found that compelling for two reasons. One, the number of people that were new to this election, either on either side, obviously it was much higher on the Democratic side, meaning the first-time voters are coming. Two things: they were younger, right, and they were Latino. So those two factors are impactful. I mean, we're talking about 2 and 3%, which most people would, no big deal. But 2 and 3% can be the decision in an election that's tight, like we're going to see in this one. So yes, I do believe that that's the case. And then again, not to go back to an early vote or early election or a special election, but SD9, I think if you look at those numbers, precinct by precinct, voter by voter, you saw independents dramatically moving over to the Democratic side. You saw Latinos go from 52% to 79%. These are marked shifts. And again, people say, "Oh, it was after the freeze, and it was a special election, low turnout." Well, remember, these numbers are percentages; they're not raw numbers. So they're telling you something. And I think there is a story to be told here that what we're seeing in the data suggests that. Look, we always know that in a midterm, it's going to be probably the party against the president. What you really should look for is the delta between what is typical in the year and then what's happening on the ground. And I think we're seeing a wave develop.
Well, and to that point, one of the biggest stories coming out of the 2024 election, obviously, is what happened with Latino voters and the shift towards Donald Trump. And I think, looking ahead to November, one of the, if not the most important thing that we should all be paying attention to is what happens with the Latino vote, right? Do those shifts towards Republicans hold, or are Latino voters swing voters, as you were saying, and shift back towards Democrats? And I think we're getting a lot of data points that suggest that Latino voters are swing voters, and that they're going to vote for whichever party in a given year is making the best case, and that maybe in 2026 that's going to be Democrats.
The Republicans spent a tremendous amount of time in the legislative session redistricting the entire state with the expectation that Latino voters would stay where they were in the 2024 election. And then a strange thing happened in the first year of the Trump administration, and that is affordability did not go the direction that most Latinos had hoped it would go. And again, the aggressive ICE tactics were quite offensive to the Latino community, and I think you saw a real erosion. You're seeing it in Pew. You're seeing it in CNN. Last night, CNN showed that it was 22% support for the president now among Latinos when it was in the high 40s.
We've seen that in our research. I'm sure you've seen it in yours.
We're seeing it all over Texas, and all those districts that were drawn with the Hispanic support, thinking that was going to remain in like Hidalgo and Cameron at 52, 55, 53%. Look, if those swing like we saw in other areas around the state and around the country, those redistricting will be dummy manders, right? And I think Democrats could really benefit from that.
Another person who I'm not sure I should say it might be worried right now is, but watching with interest some of these polls is Governor Abbott, who is not going to lose his primary, to be clear, and I think probably like safe to say remains the most popular politician in the state. I mean, he has consistently sort of had high approval ratings across the board. But he's coming off an election in 2024 where he really exerted his will on the legislature, reshaped things, getting into a lot of races and successfully picking off a lot of incumbents. This year, he put his support behind Nate Sheets in that commissioner race. He put his support behind Kelly Hancock in the comptroller race. I think there's a question right now about whether Kelly Hancock will make the runoff in that race. I think there's a real question about Nate Sheets' chances in that. If things go that way, what do you think that says about Abbott, who again, like, polls pretty well statewide and has during his entire time in office?
I think Abbott has 150 million reasons why he's probably not that worried.
You can take some gambles with $150 million in the bank.
He's going to be fine. Look, he has been very strong in the legislative races. He's been very strong in the statewide races. If he loses a few, I think he will remain strong. He will not have an issue going into the legislative session in 2027. The Speaker Burrows, I'm sure is also counting these votes and wanting to make sure that he bolsters, the support of Republicans. And if they lose a significant number of House seats, which could happen in a wave year, that is problematic for the Speaker. But I don't think Governor Abbott is too concerned about what will happen at these races if he doesn't get the comptroller's race or he doesn't get another race he might have weighed in on. I mean, the fact is he put his thumb on the scale in the legislature, and now, I mean, it's an Abbott legislature.
One other thing I want to bring up before we go to audience questions is the Tony Gonzalez race. Our colleagues at the Express News, Bayless Wagner, Nancy Johnson, have been reporting on this race. Tony Gonzalez, of course, barely escaped the primary last time. Since then, those colleagues at the Express News have been reporting on text messages that seem to suggest Gonzalez having an affair with an aide. That aide later died by suicide. They include text messages in which he pressed her to send him a, quote, sexy pic, in which she pushes back, calls it inappropriate. I don't want to play the game of, guessing why someone, took their own life. Like, that's not the game I want to play. But these text messages do not look good. He was already in an incredibly tough race. This is one where I think a sitting congressman is at real risk here.
And a number of his colleagues in the last 24 hours have called for him to resign or drop out of the race. I mean, I think there's been rumors swirling about this for, since this woman died in September, and really all of this coming to light, the week before the election. As you said, he beat Brandon Herrera, who he's running against this time, in a runoff in 2024 by like less than 400 points, and now less than 400 votes. And I'm curious your sense in particular. How much is this going to shift things for the average Republican voter in that district?
Well, look, let's not get in the business of talking about politicians as choir boys, right? We see all the time participation in these kinds of activities. They don't always end in the tragic way that we saw this one end. If this had been 3 months ago, he probably would not have much of an impact. The fact that it's the week before, I think, is troubling, right? It was already a close race. He was already in trouble in that regard. And I think this is definitely one of those issues that probably could tip the scales. Uh, Scaling back a bit, I think this is also one of those districts where Democrats have a very good chance in the general election. So if he's the nominee, I think this is good for the Democrat election. And if it's Mr. 8K47 guy, whatever his name is, that's not going to be much better for them. And again, this is one of those districts that was drawn in such a way that it's probably plus 7, 8. You get a swing of Latinos in that district of 10 points, which is, I think, very reasonable. I mean, you're looking at a Democratic flip.
This is the 23rd congressional district, which is the state's largest, stretching for like most of the border and into San Antonio. But yeah, a very swingy district.
Well, and I mean, just to that point, like I think voters in the primary and general are going to be worried about this and thinking about it as they should be. Two is just that when you look back at 2016 to 2018, Democrats obviously flipped 2 congressional seats that year. In Lizzie Fletcher's seat, there was a 17-point swing from Republicans to Democrats. And that doesn't mean that we're going to see that all across the state. But I think when you look at some of these districts that have been redrawn and you think about like, oh, what is competitive in a quote unquote normal year, like we're maybe having a different discussion about what could or what could be competitive in 2026, I think.
All right, we will go to audience questions while Matt walks to the microphone. Eleanor, you want to do 30 seconds on AG race?
The most important race. No one is paying enough attention to the Attorney General's race.
It's wild.
We have, the Attorney General's race, we got a hugely competitive race on the Republican side, a very interesting race on the Democratic side. The Republicans it's the most important Attorney General's office in the country for Republicans. So Chip Roy, really came into this with name recognition. Mays Middleton putting in almost $12 million of his own dollars to try to catch him in a runoff. Aaron Reitz and Joan Huffman, I would say, trying to weasel their way into a runoff, but going to be a fascinating race.
I mean, they're trying to out crazy each other, right? Like they're trying it's a race to the bottom. The AG race here is a race to the bottom, and Texans do not win. No matter who wins that Republican primary, Texans do not win. And I'm interested to see how that all pans out in the general, honestly.
If you follow the prediction markets, Polymarket's telling us that Chip Roy's probably the odds-on favorite to win that race. I think that's a function of name identification. And he's been on national television a long time, sometimes in the face of Trump, sometimes with him, but Trump has not released him. And so I think he probably is the person that ends up in that role. It looks like that. I know Mays has worked very hard and spent a lot of money to win that. But, look, in a state like Texas, when there's 7 large media markets, how do you spend enough money to get name recognition in a 2.5 month period? Very difficult. And so I think Chip Roy's the odds-on favorite for that race.
So as we enter into our Q&A period, just a reminder, you can ask questions at texastribune.org/ask, but we do have a few questions here. One, which is really for anyone here, they ask, how can we get more voters to vote? And I just add, with that, have we seen certain strategies that have been affected? Is it all about the races themselves?
I think there's a lot we could say here, but I think I want to pick up on a point that Jason made earlier, which is just the deep frustration that you're seeing from voters across the country and around the world with the establishment and this growing sort of anti-establishment. We want different, right? Both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are incredibly unpopular across the country. They're both pretty unpopular here in Texas in most of the polling. And so I think on the Democratic side, at least, but this is true for either side, there's going to be a real effort to say, I'm not a DC Democrat. I'm not a traditional type of Democrat. I'm a Texas Democrat, and we are different for XYZ reasons. I think that's what voters are looking for. And I think, frankly, there's a risk on the Republican side where Republicans have been in power here for 30 years. And certainly the anti-establishment sentiment has not caught up with them yet. But will it, right? Is 2026 the year that maybe it does? So I don't know. There's Jason, curious what you would add there.
It's a difficult request, right? How do you do this? I served in a district that was relatively close from a Orvis, I guess they called it Orvis back then, which is Republican versus Democrat. And what we found was the closer it was, the more people showed up. So competition obviously drives people to the polls. Now, the problem you have in the Texas primary, a Republican or Democrat, these districts are drawn for one or the other. So there's no real competition, so people don't show up. How do you change that? I proposed a bill, foolishly, to try to get a commission, an independent commission, to draw these districts so that there were always 48, 52 size districts, and then everybody would show up. But boy, that went over like well. I won't use the euphemism I would use, but I think that's competition. And then again, we talked about the rage machine earlier, and I do think there is some real animus among the public today to make a change, as you witnessed last night. And I think that anger, particularly at the president right now, is driving people to the polls, and that's good. I think that's a healthy thing, and so I think we're going to see a large turnout election for a midterm this cycle.
Does the Tallarico campaign mark a moment for Democrats to talk more about their faith? Is that a better play in Texas, kind of uniquely, or can it resonate for Dems around the country?
Well, I think it can definitely resonate for Dems across the country. I think the question, even more so, is will it resonate for general election, independent, all voters across the country? Clearly, Representative Tallarico is tapping into, and I think we see this through his social media. We see this through just the amount of attention he's getting. He's clearly tapping into something that's really different from anyone else in the party, right? There aren't many Democratic leaders even across the country who are talking about faith in the same way. I think Raphael Warnock does an incredible job. I think Andy Bashir does a really good job. But clearly James has tapped into something there that is resonating with people. I think, obviously that is, important in Texas. And again, I think it comes back to like creating one of the things you need to do to be able to win, and this is true everywhere, is create the permission structure for people who have identified as Republicans for a long time to switch parties and vote for a Democrat. And I do think faith is an entry point in order to do that.
I think this is a very good moment for Democrats to seize the mantle of religion and politics, right? The Republicans have really used what they call Christian nationalism to claim the mantle of religion, right? But Christian nationalism is not Christianity, and it's certainly not just general spirituality or faith. And so I think if Democrats can juxtapose the brand of faith, religion, that they represent, as Tallarico does so eloquently on the stage, I think that's a real opportunity for people who are moderate Democrats or even crossover Republicans to say, I'm not as comfortable with Christian nationalism, but I am comfortable with feeding the poor and loving my neighbor, and those are kinds of things I think that are universal among Texans, but the Republicans have not really seized upon that in their focus on what they call religion.
Well, and it's an opportunity for Democrats not to just try to take back faith, but to take back morality, right? And this, like, who is the party that you can trust to do what's right? And I think at a time when you've got Donald Trump in the White House and potentially Ken Paxton as the top of ticket Republican nominee in Texas, like, that is an argument that is kind of makes itself a little bit.
So with that, we'll turn the program back over to Matthew and Eleanor.
Okay, well, thank you to both of our guests. Really appreciate this conversation. I also want to say thank you to everyone here in the audience, people watching online and listening to this on the podcast later. Really appreciate it. Next week, a big reminder, we will do the post-primary wrap-up. I will not be there.
We'll be a day late.
Right.
Wednesday.
Wednesday,
Yes.
yes, thank you. And I will not be there because CBS and the FCC will
Yeah,
not
won't
allow me to
it.
be on
Yeah,
there.
they're muzzling you. Yeah.
Just trying to get 85 million people to watch that. But Eleanor will be hosting, again, Brad Johnson, Tribune reporter, Brad Johnson from the Texas Bullpen, Tribune reporter Renzo Downey, former Tribune reporter and Capital Tonight host James Barragon, and late breaking news, former Texas Tribune reporter Patrick Svitek will be joining us as well. Enjoy that.
It'll be great. Yeah,
All right.
the four horsemen of Texas politics.
It might
Yeah.
get 80 million views.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all again, and we will talk to you all next week.